My son forgot to hang up the call, and what I overheard broke something inside me that I'm not sure will ever fully heal. It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I had just finished wiping down the kitchen counters and was about to make tea when the phone rang. It was Greg, my son. He called to ask if I could pick up some detergent the next time I went to the store. The conversation was brief. I said yes, of course, and he thanked me. I thought that was it. I placed the phone back on the table and turned to the kettle, but something strange happened. The line was still open. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing. At first, I thought maybe he'd called back. I picked up the phone again, but I didn't say anything. That's when I heard it. Greg's voice, clear and close, like he had placed his phone down nearby and forgotten to end the call. He didn't know I was still on the line. I should have hung up. I should have minded my own business. But I didn't. I'm telling you, she's not going to be around much longer, Greg said, his tone casual. I froze. Melanie's voice came next. My daughter-in-law. So what's the plan? We can't wait forever. The housing market won't stay this good. Greg laughed low. We'll tell her the guest house needs repairs or something. Maybe suggest that it's time she thinks about a retirement community. You know, more social life, her own space, closer to people her age. Closer to people her age? Melanie snorted. What, like The Walking Dead? They both laughed. Stood there, the receiver pressed against my ear, heart pounding so loud I could hear it echoing in my chest. My hand trembled as I gripped the kitchen counter. Then a third voice chimed in. Barbara, Melanie's mother, who had been staying with us temporarily for over a month. Look, once she moves out, you two can turn the guest house into a rental. That's at least $800 a month easy, maybe more. I could finally get that home office, Greg said. And hey, she wouldn't need much, just a small place. She's not working, she doesn't drive anymore. She's just taking up space, Barbara said, her voice sharp. And honestly, she's starting to forget things. Did you hear her yesterday? She asked me if the oven was still on after she'd already turned it off. I think she's getting worse, Melanie added. She left her wallet in the fridge last week. That was true. I had, but I had also gone back and gotten it as soon as I realized. It had been a long day. I was tired, that's all. I'll talk to her, Greg said. Ease her into it. Maybe tell her it's for her own good. Safety and all that. She'll buy it. I hung up. I don't remember walking to the couch, but I sat there for over an hour. Not crying, not even breathing fully, just processing. My son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died in a car accident. The child I had cooked for, worked double shifts for, missed doctor's appointments for. The young man I gave my entire savings to so he could open his second restaurant. He was plotting to get rid of me. Not in anger, not out of desperation. Just convenience. I thought maybe I'd misheard, that it was a joke. But I knew Greg's tone. He was serious, calm, strategic. I went to my bedroom, shut the door, and lay down. For the first time in years, I didn't go outside to water the garden. I didn't set the table for dinner. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. I made breakfast for everyone. Eggs, toast, fruit, just like always. Melanie smiled as she walked into the kitchen. Smells amazing, Carol. I nodded. I didn't say a word. Greg came in next, kissed the top of my head like he always did. Thanks, Mom, he said, pouring coffee into his thermos. "I'll be back around 6. Barbara wandered in last, still in her robe, hair in curlers. "Morning, sunshine," she said, grabbing a banana from the counter like she owned the place. I watched them all move around me like nothing had changed. But everything had. That afternoon, while they were all out, I went to the bank. I requested a full printout of all joint accounts and pulled up statements for the past 12 months. Then I contacted the family lawyer who helped with my will when Greg's father passed away. I didn't say much, slamming cabinets and muttering under her breath every time I walked past. Greg avoided me entirely. Barbara left 3 days early without a word. On the final day, Greg stood at the door with 2 bags at his feet. He didn't look angry, just tired. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. I looked at him carefully. I did. He picked up the bags, hesitated. "I thought you'd come around," he added. "That you'd cool off. You never considered that I'd stop needing you." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Well, I hope you enjoy it. The silence, the empty house." "I will." He stepped out. "Goodbye, Mom." I didn't respond. I closed the door slowly behind him. That night, I sat in the living room for the first time in weeks. The dog smell was gone. The house was quiet. There were no shoes left by the door, no mail I didn't recognize on the counter. The thermostat was exactly where I left it. I poured myself a cup of tea. I sat down with my file, the one with the pictures, the journal, the documents. I didn't need it anymore. I placed the folder in the fireplace and lit a match. It burned slowly. The next morning I opened the windows and let the fresh air in. Walked through the house room by room, not to clean, but to reclaim. I took the pillows off the couch, rearranged the kitchen table, opened the curtains. I dusted the guest house and left the door open. I called a contractor, not to remodel, but to turn it into a reading room. 1 week later, Joan, my old friend, from church, came to visit. She brought muffins and flowers. We sat in the garden. I told her everything, not to get sympathy, just to say it out loud. She didn't interrupt once. At the end, she asked me how I really felt. "Free," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I could breathe in my own home without waiting for footsteps in the hallway or whispers behind closed doors. They thought I'd break. They thought I'd beg. They thought I'd come crawling back. But I didn't. I never needed to. Once treated like a forgotten side space, had become the safest part of the entire property, the one area untouched by their games. But I knew it wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later, they'd try something else. But they were starting to realize what I had known from the beginning. I wasn't going to fold. I had drawn the line. Now I was waiting to see who'd cross it next. It had been 3 weeks since Barbara returned to the house, and 2 since Melanie sent the mediation notice. Greg hadn't said a word since our last conversation. Barbara acted like she had seniority. Melanie seemed to be playing some kind of waiting game. And me, I moved like I didn't notice any of it. But I noticed everything every time the dog barked past midnight. Every time the thermostat was turned up to an unreasonable degree. Every time a dish I had placed in the drying rack disappeared. It was clear they had one plan left: make things uncomfortable until I gave up. That was the part they still didn't understand. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't afraid of uncomfortable. One morning I found my bedroom door ajar. I never left it that way. I looked around. Nothing was missing, but I didn't like the message. I installed a lock the next day. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't explain it. 2 days later, I caught Greg in the backyard with someone else. A man in work boots and holding a clipboard. They stood behind the guest house, pointing at the roof and the side wall. I stepped outside. "What's going on?" I asked. Greg didn't flinch. "Just getting an estimate for a renovation." "On my structure?" He didn't look me in the eye. "It's part of the property." "No, Greg. That guest house was specifically named in the trust. You know that." He gave a small shrug. "We were just looking." I didn't speak. I walked back inside, took the latest security footage from the outdoor camera, printed it, and added it to my folder. That same night, I received a call from Paula. "Carol," she said, "I think it's time." "For what?" "For the clause we talked about. The one that lets you trigger the occupancy override." I sat back in my chair. "You mean evicting them?" "Yes. You're fully within your rights. They're not named as owners, and they've received multiple written notices already. If you want to proceed, I can start the formal filing tomorrow." I looked out the window. The kitchen light was on. I could see Barbara moving around like she owned the place. Melanie was on her laptop, probably emailing that same real estate agent again. Greg wasn't home yet, but I knew exactly how his evenings went. He'd walk in, nod at them, pour himself a drink, and disappear into the bedroom. "I'm ready," I said. Paula didn't hesitate. "I'll file first thing in the morning." It took 9 business days. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. Inside were the official notices. 30 days to vacate the property. Legally binding, signed and certified. No room for interpretation. I handed it to Greg at breakfast. I didn't make coffee that morning. I sat at the table waiting for him to come into the kitchen like he always did. He stared at the envelope for a few seconds before opening it. "What is this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "It's formal notice," I said. "You, Melanie, and Barbara need to leave. 30 days. "You're serious," he said, raising his voice. "You're kicking us out?" "I'm reclaiming what was always mine," he scoffed. "You don't get to do this, Mom. You don't throw your family out like strangers." "You already did that," I said. "When you sat at that table and called me a burden, when you planned behind my back, when you brought in lawyers and agents, that's when you made this choice." He didn't speak for a while. Melanie walked in and looked at the paper in his hand. Her face changed immediately. "What is this? She's evicting us," Greg said flatly. "You can't be serious," Melanie said, turning to me. "You're going to kick us out of the house you gave us?" "No," I replied. "I'm taking back the house I let you borrow." Barbara came in next. She looked at their faces, then mine. "What now?" she asked. Greg tossed the envelope onto the table. "Unbelievable," Barbara muttered. "You think you're going to be fine alone?" "I already am," I said. No one said anything after that. The 30 days passed quickly. They didn't fight it in court. They knew they didn't have a case. Melanie packed first, loudly. I printed the photos from my security camera, the one above the porch that captured the agent's face, the clipboard, and Greg walking her around the yard. I added the prints to my folder along with the journal I had been keeping. The next day, I called Paula, my lawyer. "They brought in a real estate agent," I told her. "Did she enter the home?" "No, but she took pictures outside." Paula sighed. "I'll draft a formal letter reminding them of your legal position. I'll send it certified so they can't deny receiving it." "Good," she paused. "Carol, if they escalate, you know you have options." "I'm aware." I hung up and sat quietly for a long time. I didn't want this. I didn't enjoy this. But I also knew I couldn't afford to let them wear me down through silence and waiting games. Later that week, I received an envelope on my bedroom dresser. It was left there without a word. Inside was a handwritten note from Melanie, 2 pages long. Her handwriting was neat, overly careful, like she had rewritten it a few times before settling on this version. She called the situation sad, said I had misunderstood their intentions, and that they only wanted what was best for everyone. She said I had become difficult and untrusting, and that living together no longer felt healthy. Then came the final paragraph, polite but blunt. She asked me to consider moving out voluntarily before things had to be handled more formally. I folded the letter, placed it in my file, and made another note in my journal. Melanie's written notice received. Tone, passive-aggressive. Language, pressuring. I didn't reply. 2 days later, a second letter arrived. This time, it was from a mediation firm. They were inviting me to attend a family conflict resolution session, arranged by Greg and Melanie. I read the letter twice. Then I laughed. They were escalating. That night, Greg knocked on my door, not the casual tap, a formal knock like I was a neighbor he didn't know very well. "Did you get the letter?" he asked. "I did." "Well?" he asked, folding his arms. "I'm not interested." He blinked. "You're refusing to even have a conversation with professionals?" "I already had the conversation. With you. You didn't listen then." "Why would I repeat myself in front of strangers?" He stepped forward. "You're making this worse." "Then it has to be." "No," I said calmly. "I'm just not letting you keep control." He stared at me for a long time. "I never thought it would come to this," he said finally. "You mean you never thought I'd stand up for myself?" That stopped him. "I'm your mother, Greg. I raised you. I gave everything I had for you. And the moment I needed space, the moment I said no, you treated me like a problem to solve." He looked down at the floor. "I didn't want to fight," I added. "But if you keep pushing, I'll treat it like one." He didn't answer. He left. 3 days went by with no communication. Then, out of nowhere, Barbara returned. She walked in like she had never left. She brought in 2 suitcases and a small dog I had never seen before. Melanie greeted her at the door, and Greg helped carry her bags. They all acted like everything was normal. I stayed in the guest house. That night, I heard the dog barking at 3 a.m. I heard Melanie whispering in the hallway. I heard Barbara's voice through the wall. I didn't go out there. I made my tea and went back to bed. The next morning, Barbara cornered me in the kitchen. "You're really dragging this out, aren't you?" she said. I didn't reply. "Greg's a good man," she went on. "He's trying to fix things. You could make this easier if you wanted to." I looked at her. "This isn't your house. It never was." She smiled coldly. "You're right, but it won't be yours forever either." I stared at her, unblinking. "You're right again. That's why I made sure it won't be theirs either." She went quiet. Then she turned and walked away. That evening, Paula called. "I received a call from the mediation firm. I let them know you declined, and I also advised them that any future contact should come directly to my office. Thank you." "There's one more thing," she said. "You may want to consider taking a temporary break from that house, even just a weekend. Sometimes it helps to remove yourself and let the silence settle." "I'm not going anywhere." "I figured you'd say that." After the call, I sat in the guest house and looked around. This small room. Melanie opened her mouth, but I held up my hand. You both made it very clear how you see me. As a problem. As a weight. As something that needs to be managed. And now that the legal route didn't work, you're trying the emotional one. Greg stepped forward. Mom, that's not... It is, I said. It is exactly that. He stopped. Melanie looked away. I gave you this house, I continued. I signed the deed over because I thought it would help you build a better life. I gave you my savings for your business. I helped raise your daughter. I let your wife's mother move in and take over my kitchen. I stayed quiet. Through all of it, I stood. And the moment I started asking questions, the moment I decided to protect myself, you decided I was the problem. Greg's voice broke, slightly. We were just trying to make things easier. For who? I asked. Because nothing you planned was for my benefit. No one spoke. I looked at Melanie. You were already looking at paint colors for the guest house before I even moved out. Her expression tightened. You thought I'd just go along with it, I said. That I'd smile and say thank you while you boxed up my life. Greg rubbed the back of his neck. We didn't think it would get this far. It got this far because you weren't honest, I said. And now that I've taken steps to protect myself, you're realizing the one person you assumed would never stand up for herself actually did. I walked to the door. This conversation is over, I said. If either of you bring this up again, you'll get a call from my attorney. And next time, you won't like the tone. Greg looked stunned. Melanie stood slowly. So that's it? You're just shutting us out? I'm not shutting anyone out, I replied. I'm just no longer letting you decide what happens to me. I left the room. They didn't follow me. That night I sat in the guest house, staring at the ceiling again. But this time it wasn't anxiety. It was calculation. They weren't going to stop. I knew that now. The polite phase was over. Now they'd test limits, look for pressure points. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything. What was said, when, who was present, if they knocked on the door, if they moved anything of mine. I kept it detailed. Not for revenge, for protection. The next day, Greg asked me to have lunch. I declined. 2 days later, Melanie tried to have a heart-to-heart. I said I was busy. They started walking on eggshells again. But this time, I didn't care. I moved as I pleased. I cooked when I wanted. I kept to myself. I smiled when I had to. But I didn't let them in. They thought I'd fall apart when they cut off their warmth. But I had already survived something. Worse, I had survived hearing my own son treat me like I was a burden. Everything else after that was just noise. The days following the so-called reset talk were quiet, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel like calm. It felt like waiting. Everyone in the house was waiting for someone else to make the next move. I didn't give them what they wanted. Melanie started closing the door to their bedroom more often. Greg left for work without saying goodbye. If we crossed paths in the hallway, we'd exchange brief nods or avoid eye contact altogether. The tension was thick enough to notice, but not loud enough to point fingers at. And yet, even in their silence, I knew they were still trying to find a way around me. That Sunday, a woman I didn't recognize showed up at the house. She pulled into the driveway in a white SUV and walked to the front door carrying a clipboard. I watched from the kitchen window as Greg opened the door, stepped outside, and spoke with her for about 10 minutes. They walked around the yard together and she took pictures of the backyard and the guest house. A real estate agent. I didn't need to ask. When she left, Greg came back inside, looking surprised to see me standing at the counter. "You didn't tell me we were expecting guests," I said flatly. He paused. "She was just giving me a quote. No big deal. For the property you don't own?" He sighed. "It's just an estimate. We're just thinking about options." "You mean you and Melanie?" I said, still making decisions without me. "Mom, you're making this harder than it has to be." "No," I corrected. "You just didn't think I'd make it hard at all." He didn't answer. He walked away. "That evening, you've made this house hostile." "No, I made it mine again." She didn't answer. She grabbed her purse and left. Greg came home late again that night. He didn't say much, but he looked like he knew. After dinner, I sat in the guest house and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't the life I wanted. I didn't imagine things turning out this way, but I wasn't going to apologize for protecting myself. They had tried to ease me out. Now they were realizing I wasn't going quietly. The next morning, I made coffee and sat in the kitchen. Greg came in slowly, poured himself a cup, and leaned against the counter. "She talked to a lawyer," he said. "I know. She wants to sell." "I won't stop her, but she won't sell my house." He nodded slowly. "I told her it was a mistake, that it would blow back on us." "It already has." He looked tired. "I don't want to fight with you." "Then don't." Greg stared at his mug for a while, then finally looked at me. "You're not who I thought you were." "I was always this person," I said. "You just got used to me not saying anything." He didn't answer. He walked away, and that's when I knew. This wasn't just about real estate, or money, or living space. This was about control, and I had taken it back. By the time the weekend rolled around, the tension in the house was visible. Not subtle, not under the surface, visible. Melanie barely spoke to me. She didn't bother hiding her irritation anymore. She slammed cabinets, rolled her eyes when I walked into the room, and whispered into her phone, with the door closed, almost every afternoon. She had stopped pretending. Greg wasn't angry, but he was distant in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. No more casual small talk, no checking if I needed anything from the store, no sharing updates about the restaurant. Just silence. Assumed Barbara was still staying with her friend Cheryl, because she hadn't shown her face in over a week. That gave me some space, and I used it. I started taking long walks in the morning. I stopped cooking dinner for them. I made enough for myself, and that was it. The fridge was organized, but only with what I needed. I no longer did their laundry. I didn't fold their towels. I didn't refill the coffee container when it ran low. I was invisible to them now, and for the first time, I welcomed it. Until Saturday afternoon, I had just returned from the library. I liked going there now. Not for books necessarily, but for silence that didn't feel like tension. When I walked into the house, Greg and Melanie were waiting for me in the living room. Their body language said everything. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. Melanie was sitting on the far end of the couch, arms crossed. Greg was pacing lightly, hands in his pockets. My stomach tightened the second I saw them. Greg looked up. "Can we talk for a minute?" "I guess we're doing this now?" I asked, not moving past the doorway. "It won't take long," Melanie added, her tone flat. I stepped in slowly and sat on the edge of the recliner. Greg cleared his throat. "Look, things have been hard lately. We've all felt it. There's been a lot of miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" I repeated. He held up a hand. Just let me finish. I stayed quiet. We didn't handle things the right way. I'll admit that. But what we're trying to do now is talk things out. Be adults about this. Find a solution that works for everyone. Melanie jumped in. We're not trying to push you out, Carol. But we can't keep living like this. The energy in this house is toxic. I said nothing. You've changed how you talk to us, she continued. You're cold, distant. You barely acknowledge us. Greg nodded. It's like you don't even want to be part of the family anymore. Is that what this is? I asked. Some kind of intervention? We just want a reset, Greg said. Start fresh. Rebuild the relationship. By doing what, exactly? Melanie shifted. Well, to start, we think it would help if you consider downsizing. Maybe moving into a senior living community. Something quieter. Less stress for everyone. I looked at them, both watching me like they were waiting for me to just nod and say, thank you. You mean, I said carefully, that after months of talking about me behind my back, after sending me a legal notice dressed up as a friendly suggestion, and after treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. You want a reset? Setting my coffee down. I heard it exactly as it was. I didn't imagine it. I didn't invent it. I listened. And what I heard was 3 people deciding what to do with me like I was an object. Greg sighed, rubbed his forehead. Mom, that wasn't what we meant. Don't lie, I said calmly. You forgot to hang up. I heard it all. Every word. That shut everyone up. Melanie walked out of the room. Barbara followed her. Greg sat there a few more seconds before pushing, his chair back and standing up. I can't deal with this right now. He left too. I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. I didn't cry. Not this time. The part of me that would have begged for understanding, that part had shut off. I had crossed a line I couldn't walk back from. I wasn't their caretaker anymore. I wasn't their fallback. And they couldn't stand it. That afternoon, Melanie didn't make dinner. She always cooked on Thursdays. It was part of the routine. But that night, the kitchen stayed cold. She and Greg ordered takeout. I heard the delivery man knock. I watched from the window as Greg paid. No one offered me a plate. No one asked if I wanted anything. I didn't go hungry. I made a sandwich, just like I did when Greg was 10 years old, and forgot to tell me about his class potluck. I sat in the guest house, alone with my sandwich. And I didn't feel lonely. I felt steady. That weekend, Melanie's mother packed a suitcase. I'm going to stay with my friend Cheryl for a while, she said, loud enough for me to hear. I don't think I'm welcome here anymore. I didn't answer. She left later that afternoon. No goodbye. Greg barely spoke to me that Sunday. I saw him in the garage, reorganizing tools that didn't need organizing. He didn't look at me. Melanie went out for brunch and didn't come back until after dark. The next morning, Greg knocked on my door. Can we talk? He asked, standing in the hallway with his arms crossed. I stepped aside. Sure. He sat on the edge of the couch in the guest house. His face looked tired, but not angry, just unsure. I didn't know you heard all that, he said quietly. I know. I shouldn't have said those things. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean for me to hear it, I corrected. He looked down. Yeah. There was a pause. I don't know what's happening, he said. Everything used to be simple. You always helped. You were always there. And now it's like you've changed. I didn't change, Greg. I just stopped letting it slide. He shook his head slowly. You were part of this house. Now everything's tense. Melanie's upset. I'm walking on eggshells. I feel like we're all strangers. That's because you made decisions behind my back, and now you're uncomfortable because I called you on it. He didn't argue. He just sat there, quiet. I've spent years doing everything for you, I continued. I gave you this house. I helped with the restaurant. I babysat when you and Melanie wanted weekends alone. I paid for your debts more than once. And I never complained. Never. He still didn't speak. But now you think I'm in the way. You talk about me like I'm a burden, and you do it casually, like I'm furniture. Do you understand how that feels? Greg looked up, his eyes red. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I know. That's the worst part. He stood up. I'll try to fix it. You don't need to fix anything. Just live with it, like I've lived with everything else. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked out without another word. The next few days were awkward, but calm. They avoided me. I let them. Melanie wasn't cold, but she was distant. She stayed in her room more. Greg left earlier for work. They barely looked at me when they passed in the hallway. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, addressed to me, from a lawyer. Melanie's last name was on the return address label. Inside was a short document, basic but very clear. It was a request for me to consider alternative housing options, framed as a kind and respectful suggestion. But it came from a law office. That wasn't kindness. That was pressure. I didn't respond. 2 days later, Melanie brought it up. Did you get the letter? She asked while I was washing dishes. I did. And? I'm staying right where I am. She scoffed. No, we're trying to handle this like adults. You sent a lawyer. That's not adult. That's a threat. Melanie's jaw tightened. And let's be honest, this house is a lot for one person. Greg and Melanie are working so much, and you're always taking care of everything. Wouldn't it be nice to relax for once? I smiled. I'm comfortable here. Barbara blinked. Just think about it. I did. Just not for the reason she wanted. That weekend, Melanie suggested we all go out for brunch. I almost said no, but then I realized it might be useful. I needed to watch them all together. At the restaurant, Greg was in a good mood. He ordered extra mimosas and even made a toast. To family, he said, lifting his glass. And new beginnings. Melanie squeezed his hand. Barbara raised her glass. I smiled politely and took a sip. On the way home, they were chatting about redecorating. Melanie wanted to switch out the curtains in the dining room. Barbara thought the guest house could use a fresh coat of paint. Greg mentioned that he might have someone come by to inspect the foundation in the next couple of weeks. That was the moment I knew. They weren't just thinking about pushing me out. They were already planning the after. That night, I went to my room and pulled out the folder Paula had given me. I began filling it out carefully. Every answer, every name, every line. I listed my trusted friend Joan as emergency contact. I removed Greg from my power of attorney. I selected a new medical proxy. I put my savings in a separate account with restricted access, and I scheduled a transfer of ownership for the house into the living trust. Once complete, it wouldn't belong to Greg now or in the future. By Monday morning, all the documents were ready. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself some coffee. Barbara was talking about redecorating again. Melanie was checking something on her iPad. Greg walked in a few minutes later, smiling like nothing in the world could go wrong. I sat down at the table, folded my hands, and looked at them all. I've made some decisions, I said. Melanie looked up. Oh. I've updated my documents. The house is now in a trust. I've changed my will. I've also moved my accounts. Greg blinked. Wait, what? Barbara lowered her cup. What kind of trust? Not one you're involved in. The room went quiet. I also spoke to a lawyer. From now on, any discussions about this property will go through her. Greg looked stunned. Mom, I don't think you understand what's... I understand. Perfectly, I interrupted. I've been living in this house since before you had your first credit card. I know what's mine, and I know what you three have been discussing behind my back. His mouth opened, then closed again. Melanie cleared her throat. We weren't trying to... You were, I said flatly. You were planning it, and now you can stop. Barbara looked ready to speak, but I stood up. I'll continue to live here, on my terms. If that's a problem, you're welcome to leave. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I just walked out of the room. They didn't follow me. They didn't say a word, and for the first time in a long time, I felt in control. The day after I told them about the trust, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. No one said anything directly, but everything was different. Greg came home later than usual. Melanie didn't greet me when I walked into the kitchen the next morning. Barbara avoided eye contact. The smiles were gone. The small talk disappeared. They moved around the house like I was a stranger, like they were guests in someone else's home. And now they knew it. I didn't expect a confrontation. I had already made my point, but what I did expect was their silence. It didn't surprise me. They weren't used to hearing no from me. They didn't know what to do with it. That morning, Greg barely touched his coffee. He scrolled through his phone, didn't look up once. You okay? I asked, pretending to be casual. He shrugged. Just busy. Melanie came in and opened the fridge. She stood there for a full minute before finally saying, So, what happens now? Are we not allowed to touch anything? I didn't look up from my toast. No one said that. Well, that's the message, she muttered, slamming the fridge shut. Barbara appeared in the hallway, her voice tight. Just so we're clear, we were only trying to help. You took this the wrong way. I turned toward her. Help? By planning where to move me without asking. She crossed her arms. You're twisting it. No, I said. Just that I had questions about property rights and trust funds. She said she'd see me that Friday. Back at the house, I walked into the guest house, the very space they were planning to turn into a rental. My sewing machine still sat in the corner, untouched since December. My photo albums were stacked neatly under the window seat. There was a faint smell of lavender from the sachets I kept in my drawers. This was my home. Not a storage unit, not a spare room. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. I had given my life to this family, and they had already started deciding where I should be buried while I was still breathing. That night, Greg and Melanie invited me to join them for a movie. Barbara was baking cookies. They laughed and joked like a picture-perfect family. I watched them, smiling, nodding, playing my part. I'd heard everything I needed to hear, but they hadn't heard the last of me. The next few days, I kept my movements quiet. I didn't bring up the call. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't ask questions, but I watched everything more closely. Melanie spent her mornings on her laptop in the living room, clicking through real estate listings. I noticed that she kept a spreadsheet open, one with prices and rental projections. I didn't say a word, Barbara had started moving more and more of her things into the main house. 2 of the kitchen drawers were now filled with her tea bags and supplements. She was using my recliner in the den. She had her favorite spot at the table. I realized something then. She wasn't just visiting. She had moved in. Greg stayed mostly quiet. He was busy with work, running between the restaurant and supplier meetings. He left early and got home late. But when he was here, he was smiling. A little too much. His voice softer than usual. A little too polite. That was how I knew he felt guilty. But not enough to stop. I made dinner like always. I folded laundry like always. I refilled the fruit bowl, took out the trash, and fixed the curtains in the guest house when the rod fell again. The routines grounded me, but they didn't calm me. At night, I lay in bed, going over every sentence from the call, the tone in his voice, the indifference, the way Barbara had spoken like she had a say in my future, the way Melanie had dismissed my memory lapse like it proved I didn't belong there. I thought about leaving, but I didn't want to run. I wanted to make sure that when I walked away, it was on my terms. Friday came and I drove across town to the lawyer's office. She hadn't changed much. Her name was Paula, and she still wore the same glasses and had the same sharp focus she'd had years ago when she handled my husband's will. She looked surprised when I showed up alone. "I'd like to talk about the house," I said. She nodded slowly. "Are you thinking of selling?" "No. I'm thinking of making sure it can't be taken." I explained everything. Not the emotional part, just the facts. I told her the house was under my name, fully paid off, no liens. I wanted to know how to protect it, and how to ensure that if anything happened to me, it wouldn't go automatically to Greg unless I said so. She asked questions. I answered them calmly. When we were done, she sat back in her chair. "You know you could set up a living trust, one that names a successor of your choice, not Greg." I nodded. "That's what I want. And the contents of the house? Leave them to me until I say otherwise." Paula printed out a few documents for me to review and gave me a list of steps to complete over the next few weeks. I thanked her and left. On the drive home, I didn't feel satisfied or angry, just focused. I had a plan now. That helped. Back at the house, Melanie was in the kitchen going through my spice rack. "Hey," she said brightly. "I was thinking we could try that chicken dish you used to make. The one with rosemary and lemon. You know the one Greg loves?" I nodded. "Sure." She smiled, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. She was trying to play nice, trying to keep me steady until they made their next move. That evening, Barbara cornered me while I was setting the table. "You ever think about moving to one of those senior communities? My friend's mom loves hers. Private patio, yoga classes, movie nights. Plus no cleaning. Everything's taken care of." I didn't look at her. "That's not something I'm thinking about." She didn't miss a beat. "Well, you should. Those places are great. Great."